The city of Paris, if you like Paris, is always said to be 3 degrees centigrade warmer than the surrounding environment. And this is also very common with other cities around the world that you can think about. I'm thinking about Nairobi, London, Johannesburg, Berlin, the big cities that you may be even living right now. This is a phenomenon that is called urban heat island effect. Urban heat island effect. The island is like the same island in the ocean where land mass is surrounded by a lot of water. Similarly, a lot of heat in one area surrounded by cooler or lesser warmer climates. I always like to give credit where it's due, and the first person to investigate this phenomenon was a guy who was called Luke Howard. Luke Howard was a British manufacturing chemist. He's also known for very many other things, including coming up with a nomenclature of how to name the clouds. But in climate change, he's known to be the first person who began to investigate why cities are a bit warmer back in 1810. What are the causes of urban heat island effect? And before we even go to that, it is important to know that both rural and urban areas receive the same heat intensity from the sun. I am aware that we also have a lot of other sources of heat. Cooking, industries, engines produce also heat. But in climate change, when you're speaking about heat stored near the surface of the earth, primarily we are talking about the heat that comes from the sun, as I had discussed in a previous video. The difference in temperature between urban and rural areas has to do with how well the surface of each environment holds or absorb the heat. Rural areas are characterized by dense vegetation. If you think about your rural area or the rural area you have access to here in Kenya, we call them shags. You will think about trees, crops, fruit trees, mangoes, avocados, grass, shrubs, any place that is not farmed or does not have like a road or a building will most likely be having some vegetation on top of it. And this reminds me of a certain process we learned back in primary school. It was a process called transpiration. If you remember very well, we were taught that plants get water from the ground, and then they store that water in the stem, in the branches, and also in the leaves. And during the day, these leaves have small holes, if you remember, which were still called stomata. And so during the day, the water leaves from those leaves to the atmosphere, or in other words, the leaves transpire. Then people who call that system air conditioning of nature or the air conditioning of the earth. Now I want us to contrast with the urban areas. In the cities, urbanization modifies physical and chemical properties of the atmosphere. The soil surface is also covered. Physically, we can think about land is always cleared during construction. You cannot do a building on top of trees. Covering of soil that is concrete. Think about the tarmac, think about the pavement, the parking lots, the house that you're living in right now. Most people in the urban areas have houses that are covered in concrete or tiling, and all these are materials that are covering the surface of the earth, actually making the surface of the earth impervious such that no amount of water or even heat can go through them. They are very strong, especially those ones that are made of concrete. And then even chemically, the CO2 and other gases that are coming from the industries, other chemicals that are generated in the lab, all of them affect the chemical composition of the atmosphere. I also want you to think about how we learned back that dark clothes always have a way of retaining heat. So in the same way, dark buildings, most of the buildings are dark. These materials that form the buildings are made of carbon, and then they are dark. They retain heat. They absorb heat instead of reflecting the heat back or the light back the way brighter surfaces would do. So what are the effects of these UHI? One is heat waves. I'm actually doing this video so that to explain what is one of the things that is causing heat waves in places which experience summer. Those four climates, winter, autumn, spring, and summer, they are usually very distinct. Summers are usually relatively hot than even most places in the tropical areas. But now, because of climate change and because these cities are very huge, the heat becomes unbearable to animals and sometimes even people die. The other interesting finding that I thought I would share is that a lot of heat, UHI, leads to invasion of insects in the urban areas. Have you ever noted that if you go to old places, you'll see lesser amount of animals, small insects such as crickets, cockroaches, as opposed to urban areas. Urban areas has a larger concentration, and I was learning that all these insects are something called ectothermic. That means that they are not able to regulate their body temperatures, and they always rely on the environment. Us human beings are, and animals are endothermic. We are able to generate heat inside our bodies and energy from the foods that we eat, and we are also able to regulate it. So for them, they always have to go to places which are warmer. They would prefer places which are relatively warmer so that they are able to breed better and they are able to survive. So if we maintained the climate as it was meant to be, would be able to deal with some of these invasion that are that really bother us. So that is all for today. I hope that you go and find out more about urban heat island effect. And this is just the face value to bring to attention that such a phenomenon exists. Catch me next if you can. Good afternoon.